Good morning, dear friends. Thank you for being here today. Today is Tuesday, November 23rd, Yud Tes Kislev, the 19th of Kislev. Reb Beryl aptly observed that this is not orange juice, and we don't usually have drinks that are not orange juice at our Talmud class, but today is a special day. Today we're starting a new chapter, Perek Asiri, and we're also celebrating the Yud Tes Kislev, which is known as the Chag HaGeula, the holiday that is celebrated for the redemption and the survival of the Baal HaTanya, but it's so much more than that. In the Chabad tradition and those who appreciate the contributions of the Alter Rebbe of the Baal HaTanya, it's the day that allowed everything that followed afterwards, the founding of the Chabad Hasidic movement and the contributions that the Baal HaTanya made for the Jewish people, both his intellectual legacy and his motivational legacy and the miracles, blessings, and the future Rebbes all happen and all exist and existed exclusively because of this day. So special a day. It is such a special day that it's referred to in the Hasidic tradition as the Rosh Hashanah of Hasidus, the New Year of Hasidus, because it is this day that enables and empowers everything that the Baal HaTanya did in the years that followed, and it's what allowed Hasidus to exist. Now, this is a Gemara shir, so we're going to get to the Gemara in a moment.
Just before you do, Dr. Hammer will agree with me, I'm sure. What I found most touching in the introduction to the Tanya is the Alter Rebbe says that these are things I struggle with myself, putting himself on the same plane, which is a very, very humble way to start a sefer.
So just to add Shkach Reb Beryl. So although we don't usually say L'chaim in the morning, but we'll say a small L'chaim for both a new chapter and a special day. And may all the blessings associated, all the optimism and all the big blessings that are associated with this day should be there for all of us, for all of the dear members of this Chabura. L'chaim, L'chaim. Just to point out, his name was Shneur Zalman. And the Lubavitch Rebbe, his great grandson, would speak of his name as there's great significance. He said Shneur, which is a Jewish name, means Shnei or two lights. And the Baal HaTanya famously, besides for the many contributions he made to the Hasidic community and the organizational contributions, he has two primary works that he himself authored: the Shulchan Aruch Harav, which is a work in how to live one's life as a Jew, and he has his unique style and great contribution to the discussion of halacha. And then, of course, he has his work, the Tanya or Likutei Amorim, and his work, which is considered one of the most fundamental works of Hasidic thought. And along the lines of what Reb Beryl said, the time that preceded the Baal HaTanya, there was a lot of elite sentiments, and so you had simple folks, and you had the people that were in the yeshivas studying. And then even in the Hasidic world, there was a notion that you had a tzaddik, and the tzaddik was the one that had access to all of the Kabbalistic and esoteric teachings. And a chassid's job was just to listen to the tzaddik and follow along and receive blessings. And the Baal HaTanya kind of pushed back at this sentiment in a way that was not entirely appreciated by everyone who was even part of the Hasidic movement. And the Baal HaTanya wanted to democratize Hasidus in the sense that he wanted every Jew to be enabled, empowered, and have the responsibility to not just observe Judaism, not just do the halachas, but to be infused with meaning and appreciation. And we might even use the word kavana, that there should be the soul of Jewish practice as well. And it's not something that is exclusively available for a great tzaddik or a great scholar. The Baal HaTanya wanted that every Jew should have access to a meaningful Judaism, and a Judaism that doesn't just capture their hands and feet, but a Judaism that captures the heart and mind of a Jew. And a Jew, in the teachings of the Baal HaTanya, should have a holistic and fully a connection to Hashem that is with every part of their being. And that's one of the primary teachings of the Baal HaTanya, and that's something that was unique to the Baal HaTanya. One last thought: the Baal HaTanya called his work Sefer Shel Beinonim, the book of the average folk. So the Baal HaTanya in his presentation, although it's a high demand, let's say, and there's high expectations, What the Baal Tanya presents, that his teachings are something that any person that struggles can find inspiration, meaning, and guidance. And his point is, this is not an exclusive work for people that have made it. That's not what Judaism is about. It's about people that are struggling, people that are doing their best. And so for a lot of people, especially in 2021, we hear this all the time. Rabbi, I can't be involved in, can't go to shul or come to a shir because you don't know what I ate yesterday. You don't know what I did last night or what I did yesterday or what I'm going to do tomorrow. And the Baal Tanya taught an important teaching. And then we're going to go to the Gemara, which is that we are not hypocrites. We're complex beings. And we have multiple voices in our heads. We have a Yetzer Tov and a Yetzer Hara, and so when a person does the right thing, it means that they managed to listen to the voice of holiness and correctness, their Yetzer Tov. And when a person messes up, it means that for today the Yetzer Hara managed to win the day. But it's not that we're crazy and it's not that we're hypocrites. Therefore, all we need to do is try that. For the next struggle, we should let the voice of reason win. And this is an important teaching, and it's a teaching that it really can apply to every Jew and really to every human being. Because usually the sense of when we tell ourselves that we're hypocrites, it's our Yetzer Hara that's telling us our hypocrites. He just wants us to be a consistent disappointment. Whereas the Yetzer Tov says, it's okay. You messed up yesterday, but today you can get things well. That's not hypocrisy. And so that's another important point that the Baal Tanya underscores in his work, Sefer Shel Beinim. And the Baal Tanya and the work of the Tanya is a call to action for every Jew. Every Jew can be meaningful, significant, important, and ultimately we can engage our minds, our hearts, our thought, our speech, and action in a way that makes us better people and better Jews. And so on this day, we'll say L'chaim, and certainly this is actually I have to add one more introduction. You might wonder, what does the Gemara shir have to do with the Baal Tanya? And therefore, why are we talking about it now? In truth, the Baal Tanya actually was very much ahead of his time. The Baal Tanya wanted the Hasidic community to finish the Talmud and to study the Talmud. And so the Baal Tanya established something that was somewhat unique. He wanted every community to divide the Gemara, divide the Talmud in a manner that it would crowdsource the Tanya. The Talmud. Everyone would have their own book, their own Sefer of Gemara, and together they would finish the study. And so although that's not quite the arrangement we're doing, but the study of Talmud and the study of high intelligent and high engagement in the Talmud is very much an idea that is consistent with the teachings of the Baal Tanya, and so we can dedicate today's learning to the Baal Tanya, in addition to mentioning a prayer for wishes for good health and healing for all of Klal Yisrael, and particularly we're going to mention, we're going to mention, and then we're going to be done with the introductions. We're going to mention Leah Bas Rita, Malka Bas Rivka, Shimon Halevi ben Leah, Chaim Baruch, Eliezer ben Rusa Esther, all for a refuah shleima, as well as anyone on this chabura and their households should be blessed with good health and happy circumstances. And now let us share the screen and get into our new chapter, Perek Asiri, chapter 10 of the Gemara. Here we go. Here we go. Really fast. Let's go back to the Mishnah just because we zoomed through it yesterday. Let's try to give it one more time and approach. Again, you may be muted, but please unmute for comments or to questions, corrections, or whatever else that you have to contribute. Again, the value of this year is not the rabbi who's talking, but it's the folks that are keeping him on his tippy toes and giving us the wisdom and the perspective that's necessary to have a deep appreciation of the Gemara. So let's get into it. Hamatzni al zera. If one stores a seed for the intention of planting, lizera, a seed, uladugma, or if it's going to be used for a sample, ularefua, or for medicinal purposes, v'hoitzirei b'Shabbos, and it was carried out on Shabbos. Chayiv b'chol shehu, you're liable for having carried, regardless of the amount that you stored. So again, you stored a seed for any other purposes, whatever the amount of seed you stored, that's problematic. But other people who didn't put it away, who didn't have your intention in mind, if they're going to carry this same item, their liability is only the standard measure that was presented to us in the previous two prakim. Rashi, Elokishire, B'chol Echad Shiur HaMefarish Lei. Whatever the standard dimensions are, as they were mentioned previously in our Mishnah. Bizaroinim Chamisha, if it's seeds, regular seeds, it's 5 seeds. Zerakishoin, Oidloin, Oipulmitzri, cucumber, squash, and these beans, it's 2. Bashar Dvarim, and all other items, it's based on their listed dimensions and amounts in the past two chapters, the chapter known as Kal Gadol and Hamoitzi. So again, yes.
Are we to learn anything from the way it's described here, V'hoitzi b'Shabbos, because all the other Mishnahs just says they found it, Matzia.
I don't know if we talk about finding it, but it's only relevant to it. You're asking, say your question again.
The wording in this Mishnah is what I would have expected, and all the others saying that somebody has it, took it out on Shabbos. So they go into sort of a detail, and all the other Mishnayos says just Amoitzi.
Okay, it's a good question. As we're going to see, there are some very unique conditions to this Mishnah, because again, all the other Mishnahs, we're not getting into the mind of the individual. There's a standard. So all the Mishnah needs to do is enumerate the standards. Over here, as you'll see, there's a way to designate the item that you'd be liable even at a smaller amount, size or number. And there's a way to undesignate. And so because of those different factors, possibly that's why our Mishnah here adds the detail vaytzia. So that's a good point. So again, there are things that are different. There are distinctions about this Mishnah from all other Mishnahs, which necessitates the additional language. Very astute observation. Yashar Koyach for pointing that out. So if a person stores it for whatever it is, you're chayiv for that amount. But other people ain't chayiv olav el kishiurei. Other people are only liable if they use the standard dimensions mentioned in the Gemara. Now, what if the person who carried out the seed, one seed, who usually wouldn't be chayiv, but that's the intention and purpose that you stored it for, if you go back and you no longer are using it for the previously, intended use, Chazar, if you bring it back home without using it for its intended use, now you're only liable if you have the right dimensions. So if you carry it out, you're chayiv. But when you bring it back and you no longer decide to use it as it was previously intended, you've essentially canceled its unique designation. Let's see Rashi. Chazar v'chnisai, the guy who stored it away with a specific use, and it was pachas michashir, less than the standard measurement that was listed in the previous missions. He took it out. For example, he was heading out to his field, and he changes his mind and says, "You know what? The weather is not nice. I'm not going to my field." And he brings it back inside. Now, with the return trip, you're not chayiv. Ella imkain yesh bo shir shalem, unless it has the proper dimensions. The kivan the nimlach alav, because the person changed his mind, shaloi lezorei, and they decided not to plant it. Bitul machshavtoi v'harehu kechol adam. His previous designation is canceled, and now he and the item are like usual. They go back to their default factory settings. So again, what is our Mishnah telling us? Our Mishnah is telling us that with specific kavanah, with specific intention, we can change the rules of carrying. There is a standard. If you absent-mindedly carried something, well, then here's how much is considered carrying, here's how much is not considered carrying. But if you intentionally stored it with a less than standard amount, but that's how you intended to use it, well, all of a sudden, this magically becomes carryable. It magically becomes problematic to carry, even though it is smaller than the standard dimensions. The moment the person actively cancels his intention, how so? Well, if you bring the seed back and you don't put it into the field, it's pretty clear you've changed your mind. Well, then you can actually cancel the special designation that you've had for these seeds. Now, what about another person? Another person who's handling your item? Well, and a simple reading anyways, another person cannot be liable to your standards, to your unique designation, because that's not what they have in mind. Is it always the case? Not necessarily, but for that, we're going to have to take a peek into our Gemara. Now, Tosfos asks a question, and I think Tosfos really is bringing to our attention a Mishnah that we studied not all that long ago, but it feels like a long time ago, because we've been doing this for a long time. We've been wrapping our brains around this Gemara and around these subjects for a while. There is a Mishnah in Perek Klal Gadol that says, "Kol hakosher latzniya matzniyin kamayu," something that is fit to store, and you store it, and that's how you store it. Chayiv. V'chol she'enai kosher latzniya, v'chol she'enai kosher latzniya ve'ein matzniyin kamayu. Something that is not really fit to store at these dimensions and aren't usually stored. V'hoitzia b'Shabbos, but you did carry it. Only a person who actually stores it away at this dimension, at this measure, he is chayiv. And this is really very much the same idea as our Mishnah. Very much the same idea as our Mishnah. So Tosfos tells us these are similar themes. If we stay focused, maybe we'll see some distinctions. Maybe we can go back to this Gemara a little later. So anyways, so let's keep a lookout for that. So that's what Tosfos brings to our attention. That this is a very familiar, if this sounds familiar to you, it is because it is familiar. Because we studied a similar theme in the Perek Klal Gadol when we're going through important principles, and over there it was important to mention that a person is able, with intention, with being matzniya, they are able to remove a thing from its standard designation and make it desirable even at a smaller measure. That is our Mishnah. Any comments or questions before we jump into the Gemara? If you're muted.
How many cases are we considering here? 2 or 3? That is, we have a person who stores seeds for specific purposes, and then there is another person who didn't store it for specific persons. And
but he's carrying.
And then what I think is the third case, or whether it corresponds to the first case, is the case of the person who stored for specific purposes, took it out, became liable, and then came back, and hence he is not liable if the quantity was small. But I'm not sure that the third case is the way how I interpret it. Because I thought that the reason for my question is that it seems to me that the first case for specific designation creates liability as soon as one carries that seed out. And it looks like in the third case, liability can be annulled if he returns. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is correct. So basically, Professor, and I think you've said this already, but to recap, there are 2 people, 3 scenarios. There's one person who has an evolving relationship with a seed, and then there's the guy in the middle. If he stores it with a specific intention, it's considered chashuv to him, and therefore, if he carries it, he's liable. If he changes his mind, and the best way to know he changes his mind is if his actions point to the fact that he changes his mind, they become undesignated, and now the default settings, the default rules apply. Additionally,
that means that the liability is not created at the moment when the first person goes out. That is, despite that the Mishnah says he is liable, he is not liable until he returns.
I think the professor is saying, is it permanent? The first case.
No. I'll tell you what the professor is asking. Here we have Rashi and Tosfos. What I believe the professor is saying is simply, Hold on. If the guy carried it out already, he's already liable. So how could we unliable him by carrying it back? That's so here's what I think is happening. There's two ways to understand it. In my reading of Rashi, at least superficially, here's what I understood. The person carried it out, he is chayiv. Hypothetically, he could be chayiv again for a return trip. But if his return trip, this is option A, his return trip indicates that he's not actually interested in the seed. And so his return trip is not necessarily liable in the most extreme sense. That is a way to understand this. But I would explain this in a way that makes it even more simple. I think maybe the guy brought it back inside. It wasn't Shabbos. So he's not liable.
Rabbi,
No, hold on. No, Beryl, 1 second. Basically, a person doesn't only carry things on Shabbos. He carries them in the weekday too. I think what we're saying is a person that stores items to be used on a minuscule level. Well, it means that he desires them on a minuscule level. He probably uses them like that during the weekday and on Shabbos. In the weekday, he's doing a mitzvah. He's doing his job. Sheishes Yomim Tavad, you have to work. On Shabbos, he would be liable because he's carrying. But if in a weekday, again, this is an alternate way to read it that maybe I think answers the professor's question. If in a weekday, with his actions, he indicates that he no longer desires to have this seed for this purpose, it becomes canceled so that, let's say his return trip happens on Shabbos, he wouldn't be chayiv. And the item in general is no longer considered stored for that purpose. I hope I didn't confuse things more than I made clarity. So both ways work. Either he carried it once and he's chayiv. I'll just show you in Rashi. He's not liable for his return trip. So either he started out on a weekday and he returned on Shabbos, or both happened and he's only liable for the first leg of the trip and not for the return trip. It's a little bit of a it sounds like it's a hypothetical, but it could happen.
Big stretch, Rabbi. Big stretch.
Why is it a big stretch? I know that's what Beryl wants to say, but I want.
Shabbos, there's no based on what?
On the contrary, the Mishnah basically here's really what's happening. The Mishnah could care less. The Mishnah is not interested by the nuance of what happens when he carries it. If it's Shabbos, you're chayiv. If it's not Shabbos, you're not chayiv. We already established that. What's interesting is your ability to cancel its status. And so the Mishnah doesn't really weigh in over here. You brought it back in. You brought it back home. You changed your mind. You went back. The Mishnah is not particularly interested in what happened on the first trip. We already discussed that. What's interesting is what happens on the return trip.
Rabbi.
Hold on.
But doesn't a lot of that have to do with the kavana of why you're carrying it the first trip or the second trip?
So that's what we're saying, yes.
Your awareness of it, okay.
Yes. Of course, if you carry it out, you're chayiv. Because at that point, your intention is to carry something that you've designated as significant. But that we already know from the first half of the Mishnah.
Right.
The second half of the Mishnah is teaching us that with your actions, you're able to withdraw a designation. That's the point the Mishnah wants to teach us, as I understand it. Rebel?
Do you withdraw the liability too?
I'm sorry?
If you withdraw the designation in the third part of the Mishnah,
Yes.
do you, by doing that, annul what is said in the first part of the Mishnah that you are chayiv?
I don't believe so. That's what I understood your initial question to be. And I do not believe you can retroactively unring the bell. Because at the moment you carried it, that was your intention.
Right.
Rabbi, why are we so surprised? Is this not similar to a thief who returns what he stole?
Well, there's a big difference. Well, first of all, a thief that stole might have still be considered to have stolen. But here on Shabbos, you can't, it's like, many people, and I don't say this with any judgment, but we don't, people know that in shul or in the rabbi's house, or we're trying our best, we don't put on the lights on Shabbos. So it's happened more than once that a person, because we have an instinct to shut lights off or shut lights on. So let's say they'll shut the light off and then they'll flip the light back on. If you flip the light off, flipping it back on doesn't help you for the purposes of Shabbos, because you can't unflip the switch. You can't uncarry that which has been carried. Again, this is not a judgment. People have instincts. Sometimes we do things without having a conscious decision. But just to point to the fact that you can return a stolen item, but you can't uncarry. You could do tshuva, and Hashem accepts tshuva. And in our tradition, teshuva becomes a very powerful currency, holy currency, but you can't unring the bell. You can't uncarry, to my knowledge, anyways. And so therefore, what I understand, and the professor asked a good question, and Rebel, you're emphasizing it. My understanding is you can't retroactively engineer that your carrying was not a carry. I'm open to being disproven to it. At this point, that's my understanding. Fair? Rebel, does that sound fair?
Yeah, I just think that there's a value to something you do after a sin, which doesn't cancel the sin, but puts it in a different category, maybe.
But
I
let's
think
do
there's
this.
value. There's value to that.
Let's do this. Right now, we're being mefalful, but of course, the Gemara is going to discuss this. So
Okay.
I enjoy. So I enjoy. Sometimes it's healthy, in my opinion, to have a discussion before you see the Gemara, because then we can contrast our impressions and our perspectives with the way the Gemara shares it. So there's actually a lot of value to kind of challenge our own minds to see how we would analyze something and then go to the Gemara. So these are all very good points, good questions. And let's see ultimately how the Gemara chooses to explain this Gemara. Let's see how close we were or how distant we were from in our initial assessment. But first, we need to go back to the beginning. And Rebel, I think this is connected to your question. So let's take a look. The Gemara, before the Gemara could notice, Rebel, your observation, the Gemara notices something else that's kind of interesting. It says, Hamatzniya lizera. You stored it. You stored it. Who cares if it was stored? The Mishnah asks. Lama leila misnei hamatzniya. Who needs to use the word?
Didn't we learn the thing whatever the size was that someone would store was the criteria?
Right, but maybe your intention during carrying should be sufficient, right? That's the Gemara's question. Lama leila misnei hamatzniya. Why was it necessary to put in the word hamatzniya that you dafka stored it for that purpose? Listening, you could have just as well conveyed the same ideas with a different word. With the word hamoitzi, that you carried it, lizera for the purpose of planting, ulidugma with the purpose of using it as a sample, ulirafua with the purpose of healing. So even if you didn't store it, but if you carried it with that purpose, you should also be chayiv b'cholshu. You should also be chayiv. It's the same kavana, it's the same intention, it's the same function. Rashi, and the answer is gonna be interesting. Because what the answer is going to do is tell us that there is a limit to the power of kavanah. Lisni hamaitzi zera, because there's three things. There's conscious. There's let's see. We'll see the Gemara. Let's see Rashi. Lisni hamaitzi zera. Va'afagav deloy atzniya, even though he never stored it meikara. The had the beinon shiura. Why are the measurements necessary? Usually, a person wouldn't schlep a single seed to plant. Without any explicit and specific intention, potter. You are exempt until there's a measure. By the way, guys, this Gemara, or I shouldn't say guys, men, ladies and gentlemen, this Gemara is going to answer one of the big questions we've been debating about for the whole past while, about if this Gemara is a waiver to carry small amounts. I think. So again, usually a standard person doesn't carry. Therefore, without any intention, it's neutral. The person who on their own explicitly carries a single seed to plant, behedya, explicitly, gole daite the torach va'achshave. He has revealed his perspective, his viewpoint, his kavana. His kavana is that he doesn't mind taking a trip out to the field to put a single seed in the ground. And so all of the items that our Gemara, the last two chapters, have enumerated dimensions or measurements or amounts that you can carry, that's all unspecified. But if the person does it intentionally, he is megala. He is revealing to us that he values the item in its measure, and therefore you cannot carry it, which again is a citation that clearly answers our question about if a person could use these measurements as a waiver to carry less than the minimum shear. So the Gemara asks again, why matzniya? Who cares about the fact that it was stored away? Let's just ask him what he was thinking when he was carrying it. Abaya answers, here there are some unique circumstances. What are those unique circumstances? He put it in his shed. V'shachach lama ha'tzniya, and he forgot what he had in mind at the time. So he had an intention. Now his mind is blank. He hasn't had a contrary kavana, but he hasn't had any kavana. He's essentially doing this mindlessly. V'hashta kamatikli stoma, now he's carrying it without any specific kavana. So is zero kavana enough to cancel a previous kavana? Or does there need to be an active, contrary machshava? Does there have to be an opposing thought to dislodge or to unlabel, to make an item no longer interesting for you to carry? Again, Abaya says, we're talking about in our Mishnah case where a person put it away with specific intention to carry a single seed. Then he was one day rummaging in his shed and he found a single seed wrapped up all nicely and he was curious. He said, I got to show this to my wife. What was I thinking? And he takes it and puts it on, whatever. He decides he puts it in his pocket or he holds it in his hand. Do we say because now he doesn't have the kavana, it's considered carrying? Or do we say being that he initially stored it with the kavana of carrying it like this, it's considered carrying? And the Gemara, Mahu the Tema, I would think, Betuli Batla Machshavtai. His original machshava is canceled. Even though initially he had an intention to carry and he valued it at this level, maybe his zero machshava cancels his prior machshava. Doctor, what do you think as our expert in Kavanah?
I think that when you do something with shogeg, when you unintentionally, there shouldn't be any such concept of retroactive responsibility when you had no kavanah whatsoever, weren't aware of doing something. So it's a complicated issue of why we're getting into this, concept.
I believe we have to conclude that the carrying is with a intention. He realizes that he's carrying. Maybe it was. Let me take that back. We're talking about that he did it b'shogeg.
Yeah.
So the question is, b'shogeg, is this considered carrying or not? Is this something that's a problem to carry or not? And so now the question is, okay, originally his intention was to carry it. So do we go back to his original intent? Or do we go and say, hey, right now his mind is neutral. He has no specific machshava. So do we cancel his original unique intent?
Well, we seem to believe in machshava kamaset. So there's your answer. But I don't, it doesn't sit well with me somehow. And
so in this Gemara, we say his initial designation stands until he uproots the designation with a contrary designation. So once you designate something, it maintains that designation until it's uprooted. In the words of the Gemara, Mao detema betuli batla machshavtai, I would think his prior kavana is canceled. Kamash Malana, our Mishnah teaches us no. It isn't canceled until he actively cancels it. Rashi, Mao detema kivan deshachach b'shasaitza. When he carried it, he doesn't remember that he stored it with this intention. So I would think I'm sorry. Interesting. Rashi must have had a different version. So Rashi explains, doctor, like you're saying. So being that he doesn't remember that he wants to have it like this, I would think it's not carrying, it's not choshev, it's nothing. Kamash Malan, let's look at this Rashi. This is going to be an important Rashi. Doctor, especially for you. Not that you have to agree, but just so we understand what Rashi is understanding. The chala oisa stam, when a person does a mindless act, al dasari shoina oisa. He knows that he once upon a time had a machshava, and it automatically is associated with his earlier intention. So if you do an action without any specification, it is yet attributed to the time that you had intention. And so therefore this seed remains chashuv. Basically, what it's saying is like this. You have the magical power to imbue a single seed that is usually not chashuv with chashivus. And so you and I look at the same seed, but what you don't know is that this seed is imbued with chashivus. It's imbued with significance. Why is it imbued with significance? Because your mind is very powerful and you want to plant a single seed. But your mind is so powerful that even if you forgot that you had the machshava, the seed is still imbued with chashivos, with significance. And so you carried something that is chashuv, it's significant. Unless you did unless you did an action that counteracted the magical chashivos. I know it.
This gets into therapies which focus on repressed memories as being responsible for a lot of behavior. Yeah, it's very complicated.
So, doctor, what I hear you saying is that in psychology, it's not entirely beyond reason to say that a latent machshava could really be present.
Correct.
We don't feel it, we're not thinking about it, but it's there. And that's what our Gemara, that's what Rashi for sure is explaining to us. You may not remember the machshava in your conscious, but subconsciously it is still present. And your subconscious is powerful enough to maintain the chassid's kashivos.
Rabbi.
Yes, Rebbe.
There's another possible complication.
Let's
What
hear it.
if somebody points it out to you?
That's a good question.
And then you realize.
So that Rebbe, that brings us to the next question that we need to figure out, which is, okay, so a neutral machshava is not enough to cancel a prior machshava. A non-designation is not enough to de-designate or undesignate. So how do we take away designation? That's our question now. How do we cancel designation? Well, we have a clue, but let's see how the Gemara presents it, right? What's the clue? Our Mishnah says that if you bring it back home, it means that you decide that you're no longer carrying it. Well, that would certainly be good enough. So I don't want to, let's wait for the Gemara to talk about it, and then we can do more exploration. But the question that remains to be explored is, how do you undesignate? How do you cancel a machshava? Okay. Doctor, I want to thank you very much by that. Your insight from psychology is helpful. Even if we're not entirely comfortable, it's helpful to give it some framework. And so it's a very valuable contribution. Thank you. Now we have Rabbi Meir. Yes, Alan.
I might be way out of a line here, but what if I have one good Shabbos suit and I'm going to shul and it looks like it's going to rain. So I have a light raincoat and I carry it.
Okay.
And when I get it to shul, it's still sunny. It hadn't rained yet. So I'm carrying it back. Does that cancel it?
So let me explain. That's a good question. What we're talking about is things that are usually not a problem to carry. A raincoat is always a problem to carry because it's an item that's commonly used. It's a full unit. Your question would be better asked if you have a little piece of material the size of a quarter of a mask. It's less than 3 tvachim by 3. Less than 3 fingers by 3 fingers, and so usually that's not considered a beged. So maybe that's not considered carrying. And what if you carried it because you had a watch that you didn't want to get wet by the rain, and so you kept it over your watch? Now you designated it to be something that you want to carry. This is not a halachic. This is just a hypothetical. So Now the question is, and it didn't rain. So does that de-designate the little piece of material, the little piece of waterproof material from your watch? So again, that's not a halachic. This shouldn't be used for it. But a coat is always a problem to carry. And it's never a problem to wear, right? So you have a simple solution, just wear the coat. So our talk here is about items that are below the threshold of significance. To the point where our Mishnah previously taught us, if you carried it, you didn't carry anything. It's like carrying a little piece of fuzz or a mite, a little dust particle. That's not considered carrying because you have no desire or value in carrying a dust particle. But is there a way that you could consider it chashiv? I'll tell you, I think another example. There's a whole kind of art, micro engraving. You have like a little grain of rice, and you have very, very talented artists that have tools that give them the ability to make a whole picture or a sculpture in a little grain of rice. Have you ever seen that? So I presume that a single grain of rice has no value. It's not good for eating. It's not good for anything. But what if you spent $300, or maybe it's a lot more than that, I don't know, to buy yourself a little engraved rice thing? So is that chashivas designated as something that you want to carry? I imagine yes. So I don't know. I hope that brought clarity out there. Or at least I hope it didn't confuse things. But Shekayach Reb Allen for your question. It's helpful for us to appreciate what we're talking about over here. All right, now the Gemara is going to talk about another opinion about carrying seeds. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Yehuda quotes Shmuel as teaching us the following. Now that we have some building blocks, we have some important building blocks. Our Gemara essentially taught us that even if you didn't store something, but you carried it with intention, it's a problem. It's a problem. You cannot carry. So let's say you're studying the Mishnah, and the Mishnah says that seeds you can only carry less than the size of a dried fig. You say, Baruch Hashem, I'm going to start selling in front of the shul Shabbos packages of seeds less than a grogeres. There's a good opportunity, a good business opportunity. So our Gemara teaches us no, because if you carry it with intention, let's say you want to eat it, it doesn't matter if it's less than a shear. Your kavanah to carry it designates it as carrying, and something chashuv you can't carry. Now, what if on the flip side you made the mistake, you didn't realize that you can't do it, and you put together a whole bunch of these little packets, and you put it in your storage shed, and one day you're rummaging in your shed and you see one of these packets, and it's so interesting you want to show it to your friend, and so you carry it outside. Is it considered carrying or not? Well, your old designation was to carry it for food, and you didn't cancel it out. That's what the Mishnah teaches us. But now that we know that machshava, kavanah, is very strong, even an old machshava could be enforced. Certainly a new machshava could be enforced. It's going to lead us to question what Rabbi Meir says over here. Rabbi Meir would consider a person liable for carrying even a single kernel. Shita, the Gemara says that's obvious. Kol shehu tanan. Our Mishnah taught that if a person carries a seed for planting, kol shehu, it's any amount. So why does Rabbi Meir need to teach us that you're liable for a single chita? The last Mishnah, not this Mishnah, the last Mishnah taught us that you're chayiv for carrying a kol shehu if it's for planting. Rashi, kol shehu tanan. It's the Mishnah, Rabbi Meir. And by the way, this is an important rule. When a Mishnah is anonymous, presumably it is consistent with the teachings of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir, of course, was one of the famous great students of Rabbi Akiva, one of the pillars of the Mishnah. So much so that Rashi teaches us, Stam Mishnah Rabbi Meir. The default assumption in anonymous Mishnah is most likely consistent with the opinion of Rabbi Meir. And if that's the case, well, Rabbi Meir taught us already that kol shehu, any amount of seed that you carry, you're chayiv. So why does he need to teach us a single seed? So the Gemara says no. We might not fully understand the definition of the word kol shehu, although thank you. Usually the word kol shehu means any amount. But maybe kol shehu really means an amount smaller than the standard amount. Lafuki mi gogeres. If you're feeling confused, it's not that confusing. But I understand why you. We know that the standard measure of carrying, it's a problem, is the size of a dried fig. When our Mishnah teaches us kol shehu, any amount, you're chayiv, maybe it meant dimensions that are smaller than a dried fig, but it would still have to have some significant volume. What volume? Maybe the size of a zayis. Kamash malan. Therefore, Rabbi Meir clarifies that when our Mishnah says kol shehu, any amount, it really, really means any amount, even a single kernel. So if you carry a grain of rice to plant, I don't know if I should admit to this ignorance. Alan, how do you plant rice? Is a little piece of rice going to grow a rice plant?
The rice grows in the mud.
But what is the seed? What do you have to put in the mud for rice to grow?
I don't know. I have no idea.
Talk to our indigenous friends.
I'll call Japan in a minute. Okay.
Okay.
Yes, you have to ask Reb Google.
Yeah, we could ask Google. Anyway, okay. So the point is that now we've clarified that when it says kol shehu, it means any amount. Maskif Rav Yitzchak, great Rav Yehuda. Now Rav Yitzchak, great Rav Yehuda, asked the question. Let's figure this out. If a person's machshava is super powerful, if a person's machshava is a superpower, How do we see that machshava is a superpower? Abaya taught us over here that even if you forgot about something, that remains the fact. So now we're going to challenge how powerful machshava is. I went too far. Maskif la. Rav Yitzchak Breda Rav Yehuda. Rav Yitzchak Breda Rav Yehuda is going to challenge Abaya. Elamayata. Now let's think about it the opposite. Until now, we're talking about machshava, designating a minuscule item to be chashav, to be worth carrying. What if you had a reverse machshava? His intention is to carry all of his entire household goods in a single trip. Do we say his machshava is powerful and he'll only be liable if he actually carries his entire household? The question sounds silly because I think the answer the Gemara is going to give is already an assumption, an idea we've presented. Our answer is Hassam. When it comes to larger measures, batla datoy eitzot kol adam. Here, your machshava doesn't count. There's still a standard. So machshava is powerful enough to designate that which is undesignated, to consider worthy of carrying something that you would otherwise not carry. But you can't de-designate something that usual people consider worthy of carrying. So like Rabbi Allen, in your question, you said, what about a coat? You can't undesignate a coat from carrying because the standard human approach is that a coat is something you want and you'll carry it. And therefore your machshava can't de-designate, can't undesignate. Rashi, v'shi'ura dechashav le'inshi chashav, whatever the average person considers a value, that's imposed upon you. You can't have machshava to cancel common practice. You can have machshava to cancel the insignificance of something, to make it significant.
What about a pill for a headache?
So I think a pill is considered chashav, probably.
But you might
Because
not use it. It's not in.
It doesn't matter if you'll use it. It matters if it's something that you will use, and you will use it, or not you. A regular human person would consider a single pill chashav. As a matter of fact, I would ask an even better question. There are certain medications that could even be broken in half and split up as a half dose. So now, is a half a dose considered chashav or not? And I would suspect that if it's a kind of medication that is commonly split in half, well, then that also is the standard machshava, the standard human value of this medication is that it's used. Certainly, if your doctor, your pharmacist prescribes a half a pill for you, for sure, it's considered a chashav. It's significant because that's what your doctor told you. And so anyways, that's what I imagine. So in other words, as much as we would like to say that machshava is very simple and straightforward, it is not, because there are situations where another person's machshava or the societal standard can be the fact. But even in a case where society says, it's garnished, well, as they say, some man's rags is another man's riches, and therefore your machshava can consider a single seed chashav or a rag to be, and we actually quoted that in another Gemara, if you recall. You see Rashi here. Let's go back. I explained this to you, but I want to just see the Rashis, if you don't mind. Elame'ata. This is the question that Rav Yitzchak asked. Now that our Mishnah tells us that the superpower is your machshava, so much so that your initial thought is stuck. So now what if you had a machshava, a funny machshava? You intend to take everything from your house on a single trip. Then your machshava says that it's only chashuv if you can get everything in one shot. Our answer is there, batladate. So Tosfos doesn't like Rashi's understanding of the Gemara. Rashi says this is a question to Abaya. Abaya taught us the power of machshava, and Rav Yitzchak says, hold on, how powerful is machshava? And based on his question, we have an important principle, batladate etzaklada, that the average is still a very important paradigm. It's a very important framework to understand Chashivas. All right, let's get that. Excuse me. Oh. I think we're going to stop here. Tomorrow, Mirza Hashem, we're going to pick up and we're going to compare and contrast this Mishnah with the previous Mishnah, other sources, other places with Matzlian. And don't forget, we still need to clarify what kind of machshava, if any, could cancel a prior machshava, or is it dafke maisa? And so, God willing, we have a lot of exciting, interesting things to look forward to. Let's end with a l'chaim on this auspicious day, V'yotis Kislev, praying for good health and good circumstances for all the dear members of the Chabura. And we should have the koyach and the peace of mind to continue studying the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time, Gesundheit and Freudigkeit, till the coming of Mashiach. And then we'll continue, but we'll probably have some more attendees then. So, have a wonderful day.
I wonder if there's a way to slow down the time, because this class goes by too fast.
Shkoyach, everyone. Again, thank you. I'll see you tomorrow. Shalom Bar Chumash today? All right, Chumash in 5 or 4 minutes. If you want to know how to slow down time, I would talk to Mark. All right, take care.
It's Yeshiva night I'm for bringing tonight.
Oh yeah. Tonight 7 p.m. Ma'ariv, and then we have a special yeshiva night for bringing, and some special delicacies, seasonal delicacies. So you're not going to want to miss it. If you're up to it and your doctor allows, please feel free to join us. Have a wonderful day.
I don't know if I can make it in time.
If you want to know how to travel faster than the speed of light, talk to Mark as well. All right, take care.